Hello everyone, I'm Lindsay Storvers, Head of Learning at Ikon Gallery. I'd like to welcome you to this lunchtime talk with Charisse Kenion and Vanley Burke.
Hi.
Hi. At Ikon, we're currently preparing a new group show created due to the challenges the gallery faces as a result of COVID-19. It's entitled Faster Than Ever, and involving 20 artists from across the world. We plan to reopen with this exhibition on the 4th of December if restrictions allow. Whilst the gallery's closed, we're continuing to run online events and activities in dialogue with artists and communities. Today's talk considers the need for radical and positive action within the arts to address questions of social justice and to make anti-racism a core value of our individual practices and public institutions. On the 4th of June, photographer Charisse Kenion joined thousands of people who gathered in Birmingham to support the Black Lives Matter movement following the death of George Floyd in the US on the 25th of May. Kenion produced a series of photographs which communicate the power of a community. Exchanging the iPhone for a cardboard placard turned from consumer to producer of news media. In this interview, Kenion questions artist Vanley Burke, who also photographed the protest, on the role of the camera in validating moments of political action and focusing on inequalities for the purpose of social change. Charisse Kenion is a Birmingham-based beauty writer and photographer. She has written and spoken about beauty for 15 years and is the host of the BeautyMe podcast. This is the first time that Ikon's worked with Charisse, and we're really looking forward to carrying on the conversation with her. Vanley Burke is often described as the godfather of Black British photography, an artist, photographer and curator whose archive surveying the Black British experience is held at the Library of Birmingham. His exhibition At Home with Vanley Burke took place at Ikon Gallery in 2015. We're really pleased to have you back, Vanley.
Hi.
A little bit to just give you a sense of how it's going to run today, the event. I'd just like to say many thanks to Bridge Williams, who's supporting us on the tech side of things. We're recording the talk with Charisse and Vanley, which will last about 30 minutes. As audience members, you won't be visible in the webinar at any point. However, please use the Q&A box to pose questions to the speakers, and I'll come back in at the end and share these with the panel. So I'd like to hand over to Charisse and Vanley, and I look forward to your talk. See you in a bit.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. Vanley, I'm really looking forward to talking to you, obviously, about the history of protests and your part in recording that, but I really wanted to take things back first. I would really like you to tell us about that first time that you did attend a protest, how you felt. Was there a sense of adrenaline? Was there some fear in there? Like, can you take us back to the first protest?
I can't remember exactly the first protest, but I think whatever protest I attended, by the time I started attending protests, it would be in the process of documenting it. So I'm always the observer at the protest. I'm always looking at the protest, what is happening, and document it. So I think one of the first one I can remember was one in Handsworth. It was against police brutality, and a group of people were marching from Handsworth to the police station in the city centre, and I travelled with them. It's one of the first one that I did, and that is, I think there's an image of it somewhere there. If it comes around to it, I'll point it out to you. But yes, that's one of the first ones. It was quite interesting because you see, you're an observer, so consequently, I'm constantly trying to take a photograph that represents the time, the place, the event, what's actually happening. So you don't really get involved. Obviously, the sentiments are there, but you can't. I can't go around responding to the whole of the protest because I'm more observing what's happening. I'm placing people within the context of their environments and their relation to it, their relationship with those around them. So with all of that going on, you know, it's an observant role that I play in those protests.
So how do you maintain that role? Because, you know, as a Black man attending a protest that's to do with anti-racism or against police brutality that is often against Black people, how do you maintain that? Because protests can kind of carry you along. There is a lot of emotion in the air. How do you maintain your role as I'm here to document, that's what I'm here for?
First of all, because I turned up with the camera, that's my precise objective, really, is to document. I think sometimes, as in life, when we are involved with a lot of things, we rarely get a chance to experience it. We're going through it without emotion almost. And so my interest really is how do I document this moment so that when we have the time to sit and look at it and reflect on that material. So I'm consciously thinking about my place within the production, that, you know, the documentation of that process.
So
you have that issue, rather.
So you've got a key objective there. I know in the past when you've spoken about attending protests and photographing people, you said you always tried to ensure that it was kind of from a distance so that you wouldn't show people's faces, for fear of, you know, recrimination. But, you know, right now, everything is shared so instantly, so upfront, so graphically. What do you feel about that, how times have changed and technology has changed how you can record history?
I don't have a problem with showing people's faces, and I have and do that. What I think that referred to was when I was taking photographs in the 70s. There were certain events where it wouldn't be, if you like, considered polite to be photographing some of the speakers there because of their relationship with the police. And by that, I'm not talking about criminals, I'm talking about people who are politically active. And they felt that could be implications. So there were you know, talks about that. So of course you wouldn't feel comfortable, especially when, you know, police were raiding houses and trying to collect films, you know, that were shot at demonstrations and things like that. So yeah, without compromising that, then those are the images. But I have no problem with photographing the faces of people in demonstration.
But how do you feel about how social media kind of it's a much more immediate response? Have you got any thoughts on how we share information and history as we see it in 2020?
I think in the, excuse me, in the 70s, for example, we were in desperate need of information about our contribution to a culture, world culture, because we were continuously being told that we had contributed nothing to society. Whatever material becomes available, it was questioned several times, and in some cases with some people, it was necessary to have that information confirmed by a white person, sometimes irrespective of the qualification of that person to answer that question, simply because we couldn't believe that for so many years we've been told lies. So we now are at a situation where, you know, social media is full of information, and you can cross-check this information, you know, quite quickly and all of that sort of thing. I think for me, it's what do you do with that information, and how do you add to that information? And I think my role and the use of my photographs in that have communicated, I think, just my thoughts at the time of producing the photographs and their relationship to the subject that I photographed. we need to be reflected in a society that we participate in building. And I think my contribution is trying to frame, you know, the black body within that space in all its guises.
You photographed, obviously, I don't know how many protests you photographed over the years. Did the protest in June in Birmingham feel very removed from what you'd seen back in the 70s?
It was quite different in the sense that I had been to one Black Lives Matter event before, staged in Birmingham, and I noticed there I'd recognized quite a few of the university students I'd encountered during talks I gave at various universities, and they were leading on this. I think mainly women as well. I didn't see any of the old vanguard of demonstrations there, and it was obvious that, you know, some change had taken place. And I think that was repeated in the June demonstration outside the library that I attended. There were largely young people, there were largely women, and it was quite different. Yes, there were a greater mix of people in terms of the audience. I think in the 70s, what you have to realize, you know, if a group of Black people walk down the road, you know, with a placard, everyone sort of want to close their doors, and the police should come out, and the riot shields in the background and things like that. You know, Black Lives Matter offers, you know, it's a different kettle of fish as far as, you know, that sort of protest is concerned.
Yeah, it's definitely because I was there as well, and for me, I noticed just how many I was like, there's a lot of white people here, and I feel like when you look back at, you know, your images from the 70s and onwards, it felt a bit more like it was like Black people just had to stand up for themselves, and they were often alone, but to go through that, I feel like there's a lot more support now. And obviously social media spreads these things, and now, you know, since George Floyd, I believe because of COVID, people really took notice because they weren't going anywhere. They had to see this endless flow of information. Do you feel that protests are as effective now, or do you feel that it's more like social media has taken over to support those protests?
No, I think it's still, in order to have the protest, you have to, you know, make a step. You know, social media, you move your fingers, really. And I think the demonstrations that we've seen, not just in Britain, but worldwide, for causes that are particular to people, you know, who are concerned with them, is obvious of the need and, you know, the effectiveness of protest, really. I think it's very necessary. You know, we don't always get what we want through, you know, one attempt necessarily, but that doesn't mean you need to go back. I think what social media does, it adds to the process of communicating. I think before, you know, in '85, when we had a disturbance in Birmingham, for example, a lot of that information was transmitted through, you know, the sound systems on a Friday night. You know, words would pass around what's happening. You know, no one had, there weren't mobile phones in those days to pass that information on, so people found a way. And I think it's just about how you use your phone. And I think, you know, it's not the gun that is the problem, it's the person behind the gun, you know. And I think equally, it's not the phone or the social media that is the problem, it's the person that's using it normally. And I think used effectively, I think it can be of enormous benefits, you know, to contact people.
So I was speaking to, in recent conversations with my dad and my father-in-law, there seems to be amongst like the older, perhaps West Indians that are in the UK community, of they've seen so much, they've worked so hard. And I remember my husband asked his dad, like, do you think things are different? And his dad said, I hope so. Because he's been, working hard. You come to this country, you work hard to get a home, to have a livelihood. I wanted to talk to you as, obviously you are a photographer, but as a Black man who came here in your teens, do you think much has changed for all the protests, but also the everyday behaviors? Do you feel that much has changed since back then?
Yes and no. A lot has changed, the geographical space of this, the change, the way it's used. Different nationalities have moved into the area, it's become much more cosmopolitan and all of that. The community has fragmented in many ways to make room for other people. People had to dress up, people have moved out, people have gained positions of authority or power and they've moved out of the community. So there's this constant shift and change that's going on there. But in terms of the cause that people would have been engaged with regards to their injustices that face them, I don't think that has changed very much. I think a lot of that has changed its form, but it still exists, really. I mean, it would be silly of me to even think that it has changed when, there's been so much highlighted in the press recently, not least of all that calls for the protests that we're talking about, for example, Black Lives Matter. And it's been interesting to see so many people speaking about their experience of racism from all levels of British society. It was incredible to think of, how racism has stained the life of so many people, in one fair, broad brush, whether you are, labor, whether you, irrespective of your political allegiance or religious or sexual or whatever it is, it's just everyone's just been tarred with this great big brush. And I think what's happening now is it was quite refreshing, and it's continued to be quite refreshing to see so many qualified people coming out of the woodworks to present programs on TV and so on, and write articles, newspapers, and just generally flaunted. But I think what is essential as well is for those people to start posing their own questions and not to be surrogate for the other questions, to start asking their own questions. Not questions that might be difficult to the institutions they work for, but I think we've always challenged the institutions that has kept us down, and I think there are many challenges necessary. So I just think it's, don't just give them the pen, give them a voice and the space within which to practice or perform.
For me, the reason I wanted to ask you that question is because, Black Lives Matter erupted. It's been around for a while, but it really erupted when George Floyd was, millions of people around the world saw him killed, basically. But people are in uproar about that, and then the Sainsbury's advert shows a Black family, and Britain is up in arms, like, what's going on? For me, it's just become so clear. It exists on so many levels, and it's like, people almost feel like they want to protest about this Black family being shown in an advert. So I feel, just like you said, maybe things have changed, but a lot of things have stayed the same. There's clearly a core that needs to be sort of attacked. Do you feel that photography is a key way to make things stay relevant? Like, do you feel that photography is even more relevant than it was back in the 70s when it comes to recording social change?
I think it's very relevant. I think it's just one of the many tools that people have at their disposal. You know, some people might use the camera, some they make films, some people might write, you know, do poetry, sculpt, whatever it is. And I think the camera, used as an art form, is one of the ways in which we can, you know, keep telling our stories, if you like. I think, as I said before, a lot of us who are busy living lives, we don't really get a chance to enjoy it. And I think it's, you know, it's about in some way capturing the essence of this lived experience to share with future generations about, you know, what shapes them, what makes them who they are. And I think it's these observations that, if you like, will fulfill these roles. I mean, if you know, I'm kind of interested in asking you a question as well, which is like, you know, were you political before Black Lives Matter? Were you conscious of being Black? Was it something that you would necessarily want to photograph before Black Lives Matter?
Oh, well, I'm mixed race, but I've always felt that when I go out into the world, I'm seen as Black. And yeah, in my work, these pictures that I took at this protest, that was the first time I'd been involved in any kind of protest for many, many years, like not since I'd been back at university. And that was something to do with student loans. It was nothing to do with race. For me, it's political. It's because it's an everyday thing. I've had to, when you're mixed race, you can kind of, it's weird. You could perhaps not be as involved in the conversation because the world you live in is mainly populated by, you know, white friends, white colleagues. But what happens when aware of what is happening in the news? But when Black Lives Matter happened, I had to kind of really let those white colleagues and white friends know that I am very much angry and emotional and upset and over it. It's even bringing it back to social media again. The amount, you could clearly see the amount of people that were concerned and would reach out and be like, how is this affecting you? And then, you know, many others that wouldn't acknowledge it. They just wanted life to continue. And they found it actually a disturbance, a very uncomfortable experience for them. And I just thought, well, you need to get uncomfortable because we've been uncomfortable for many years. So yeah, it's absolutely political. But it's more like life or death for many people.
No, I asked that one because yeah, I'm kind of interested in what younger people think about, you know, the whole idea of Black people being involved in demonstrations, you know, in order to bring about justice or a fight against injustice. And if you remember before, a lot of people your age weren't particularly interested in that sort of talk. I remember also being or hearing a conversation somewhere where someone was proposing the idea that racism is dead. You know, look, we've got a Black president in America, sort of thing. But it's not what I was experiencing or what I was hearing of young people's experience as they walk and try to get a job or to improve their situation. You know, we have a situation in Birmingham here where, you know, the cabinet, you know, is not representative of the population. We have the Commonwealth Committee, which wasn't until, I think that has been addressed recently. And there's certain issues, really. My flat is being renovated, and I don't think there's one Black person working on the site, you know, and there are 3 flats being decorated. And unless you feel a part of and a fabric of that community that you're engaging with, you know, really. You know, so I was just interested in, you know, you as young people, do you get your politics through talking to each other? Who do you talk to? Who do you engage with? Or is it just social media? Where do you get your information and conversation?
One, I think you're probably assuming that I'm younger than I am.
Well, you're younger than I am.
I'm younger than you, but I'm not as young as you think, I'm guessing. But I feel it's so funny that you brought up young people, because there's an argument for very young people being literally bringing about change via using TikTok to shut down, I think it was one of Trump's events, like shutting it down like in minutes because they were so active. And then if I could bring up older generations in my family, there can be an element of, you know what, I'm just going to work, I'm going to get my head down because the man doesn't care about me. So it's all these layers, and many of those layers will come from who you grew up around, how your parents, you know, my dad doesn't vote. That's infuriating to me. He has his reasons. Do you see what I mean? So I feel it's not so much a generational thing. It's almost, it's about the individuals that make up, you know, the millions. It's the individual that's got to decide for themselves. And I do think there are a lot of young people out there that are really concerned about the world that they are going to have children in. So I don't think it's so easy to generalize. But that's it with questions from me. So I don't know if Lindsay wants to step in and share some audience questions.
Okay, thank you. Tentatively creeping back in there. Thanks so much for the conversation there, and we do have a couple of questions actually. But Charisse, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about you studied, didn't you, at Wolverhampton, and studied photography with Nick Hedges?
Yeah.
So I just wondered if you could say a little bit about that. Because that art history is something that's being kind of rehearsed and rewritten at the moment, especially around 10/8 magazine that I know, Vanley, you were involved in, and I'm not sure, I think was Nick Hedges an editor of that magazine too, which had features on demonstrations and protests in the city region. So I just wondered if you might be able to say something about your schooling in Wolverhampton.
To be honest, I don't remember much of it, Lindsay. I'm not going to make stuff up. For me, I just remember that Nick was someone that's he wanted to enable you to do what you wanted to do and create what you wanted to create. But I was studying fine art and photography back then. And once I graduated, I was one of those people that thought I had to get a proper job. So I left it behind for many. So yeah, I can't offer much insight to Nick. I know he was definitely a supportive tutor, but for me, I've had to sort of resume the journey through my own exploration, probably over the past four or so years.
Just looking at both of your photos from June, like, you can see, Vanley, how you are taking a very crowd view, and then Charisse, you focus in on the portraits, and there's one particular portrait of a woman holding her mask up with a relative or a friend, and she's holding her mask up like this. Mm-hmm. And were you very much looking for the individual within the crowd? Were you looking to create those kind of moments and that portraiture?
Yeah, I think that's probably my beauty background. I do a lot of beauty editorial and portraits, and for me, I love faces. I feel that we reveal and hide so much. You can choose to hide so much, and in a setting like that, where obviously a lot of people are wearing masks, and I could really only see the top half, I was really looking. I wanted to. It's like a connection. You use the camera to make a connection, but I'm also a human being on the other side. So I'm looking around. I want to see how see if I can see how people are feeling. Are they feeling emotional? And I know those two women in particular, they were feeling the moment, but they were also concerned about the crowd developing. I think because one of them's an older lady, and for me, it's important trying to find those individuals because, you know, without sounding corny, one picture can convey so much. So yeah, that is me. I've been told in the past that I should pull back actually, because I like to show faces. But yeah, it's part of me to kind of get a bit closer in.
I wasn't at the protest, but it moved around the city then. So it seems to be outside the Library of Birmingham, Vanley. Is that the first time that space has been occupied in this way? Because I usually think of these events happening around the statue of Queen Vic in Victoria Square.
Yeah, I think this extended to that part of the city as well. But this is the first time I've attended a protest, I think, out there, although there have been other events taking place out there. My photograph of the crowd, I do enjoy doing crowd shots. I think we're a good, body of people turn out. It's quite good to, to sort of represent that. And for me, what I like about the crowd shot, and having taken quite a few and chosen that one, is I like to see the relationship that exists between the people as they move across themselves and each other. Sometimes they're not all moving as in motion, they're static and the little groups that forms. And I think what tends to happen as well is some of the juxtapositions of the banners beside each other. Although they were quite similar this time, but in previous demonstrations, is to look at the juxtaposition of the banners against the people or against the landscape they're walking through, as a town or city street or something like that. But I also do photograph, close up as well. I think the power of the close up within the individual, it can be made quite a heroic figure. And I think, I have no problem with photographing close up, but at the same time, I think what it is what I choose to give to you on this occasion. As you might be able to see, we can't see the photograph right now, but it is about those little relationships that I see developing.
In the Q&A here, Vanley, there's a couple of questions for you. I'll start with the first one from Derek Horton. I'd like to ask Vanley how he sees Pogus Caesar's photographs of the Handsworth disturbances in '85 in comparison with his own work at the time. And particularly, did he see the Billboard project Pogus did recently using those photographs alongside text by Benjamin Zephaniah? And if so, what did he think about them?
So you want me to talk about Pogus's photograph, his documentation of the riots? Yeah, Pogus documented, the riots. I mean, we don't have any images here to talk about them. Yes, I saw them. He's taken a body of work around the riots, and as it happened at the time. And the work he described with Benjamin Zephaniah, yes, I did see the posters. I thought it was an interesting, way to present photographs, working in collaboration with someone else. It's been a while now, and you just dropped this one on me. I can't think. I personally would have liked to have seen them within relation to the geographical space that the incident took place in. It would have been nice rather than being, for example, in Mosul, to have been in Handsworth, so you can immediately relate to the space and things like that. But yeah, they're a good set of photographs, and it's good to collaborate.
So the next question from the audience, Vanley, your 1978 Digbeth demo photos from the banners show how important trade union and political organisations were in its organisation. The Trades Council supported that one, I think. Do you think this participation was really very important? And do you think a fight against immigration laws would have been more effective than concentrating on the extreme right. There was no platform attempt on that occasion, I seem to remember.
Yeah, no, I don't recall a platform, you know, any announcement on that time. I think there were a few people in the bull ring who had, you know, megaphones and things like that. But yeah, the trade union, yes, the trade union supported a lot of those events, but you see the fights that we've had to engage in, you know, fighting racism over the years. For example, you know, the buses in Birmingham didn't want black people to work on them. The union didn't want black people to work on the buses in Birmingham initially. You know, so we've had a battle with the trade unions as well over the years, and I think it's, you know, after a period of time and great efforts with, you know, some, you know, people who've gone in and made changes themselves. And I mean, a Birmingham gentleman whose name escapes me now, and I feel terrible about that. But you know, yes. So we've had, you know, we've gone in and made efforts, and there've been some changes over the years. But again, you know, sometimes you do take these things with a pinch of salt. You know, okay, you have the visible call for action against racism, yet within the institution themselves, you know, it's not all that good. You know, I'm not accusing anyone at the moment, but I'm just saying that much work needed to have been done throughout, other than just, you know, giving us the ability to and supporting us saying words on the street. There needs to be deeds as well, and I don't think that those deeds were fully, you know, executed.
Okay, so there's a comment here about reflecting what you were saying, Charisse, around young people in the protests wanting to affect change. I went to both the Birmingham and Shirley BLM protests and photographed both of them. I noticed a definite difference in the demographic. While the Birmingham protesters tended to be older and black, the Shirley protesters were mainly younger and white and predominantly female. And then for Vanley and Charisse, how did you both go about starting a career as a professional in photography? What were your first paying gigs? And how did you find those opportunities?
You go first.
Gosh, I'm trying to remember. Because my photography career has been be a painter immediately, you have to pay bills, and what can pay your bills so you can continue to do the thing that you really enjoy and love. So back then it was probably things to do with local fashion shops that wanted their collections photographed, so I'd make some little bits of money off that. But when I revisited photography, because I've been writing for about 15 years, and for me it was like I need to photograph again. I need to have that connection again, because obviously images work so well with words. So for me it was like setting a challenge of, let me get started in photography again. So getting first jobs, you really have to just start where you are. So if you want to be paid to do portraits, you need to go and photograph people to show you can do it. First paying jobs, I'm trying to think. I've had some like charity ones because I do a lot of portraits. But yeah, you're putting me on the spot. I can't remember my first paid job. It's just been me kind of thinking, what do I want to do? What do I want to add? So I'll tend to go and shoot what I want to shoot. I'll even shoot myself if I'm trying to create something. It's more like the money is the benefit afterwards, you know, because I make money day to day by writing and podcasting and things like that. So for me, photography, whenever I get paid for photography, that is like the real bonus, because I would still be photographing anyway. Does that make sense? I'll if I don't get paid for the next 10 years from photography, it doesn't mean I'm not going to take anyone's picture anymore. But can you remember your first paid job?
Yeah. Well, I can remember my first attempt at getting paid. Having decided that I was going to become a photographer. It wasn't a hard sell. My family were quite supportive of that in many respects. Although my mother did say at one time that perhaps I need to look at photography as a sort of I need to get a proper job, let's put it that way. And perhaps, I could get one in some other field. And she, which was quite popular at the time. And so what was happening is my photography, I was doing an evening course in English at the time at the local night school. At the local college, but then at an evening class, there was a photography course going on. And so expressing an interest to go to the photography, my mother came up with a wonderful idea. She says, how about I go to the photography, you come back and tell you what I learned at the photography if you go to the English. So needless to say, that didn't work. I joined that course but then what I would be doing around that time is taking photographs and trying to sell them. So I had this idea that I would come and do a portrait of you and sell it to you. But I remember I took some photographs of this man, and when I took the photographs to him on a Friday evening, having spent the time in the darkroom, I bought those little sleeves and stuck them in all prepared already. And I took them to him and he says, can I come back next week for the money? Because the paraffin man had just come and he just paid the paraffin man and he didn't have any money to pay me. So, those are my early days at remembering trying to earn a living. But I remember shortly after that wasn't going to be the way to work. And it was shortly after that the idea of photographing, I didn't even think about it as documenting, the idea of photographing the Black community. And even the word archive didn't really enter my head at the time. Those weren't words in my discourse. It was, how do I photograph? How do I write art histories in photography as a tool?
Okay, so we've got a few questions here, which is great. Thank you, Charisse and Vanley, for your talk. I'm interested in your practice in taking images at demonstrations and the ongoing effect of the image after it is printed. Do you think your photos might also be a form of protest?
For me, it is a form of protest. I mean, if you like, it extends the voice of the protester, especially when the banners are included in the photograph. It shows sometimes the devastative nature of the protest. It shows the conflict, and those bricks, for example, on the ground of the photographs on show at the moment are, they weren't placed there. It was a violent event that was taking place in that. And in that sense, photography definitely records. I mean, we have the famous photograph taken in Vietnam of the napalm child that shows, said to have, indicated the change of the war in Vietnam. So they do have a voice beyond, their immediate creation.
Another question for you here, Vanley. You spoke about the desire to remain an objective observer when photographing these events, but reflecting back, how objective can any photographer be at the time? And in particular, how objective do you believe it is to be as a Black male photographer at a protest about anti-Black racism? And do you think the Black practitioners lose anything in the credibility of their work by acknowledging and choosing to navigate their own position within the subject they're covering? So objectivity.
Sorry.
So it's about objectivity. And where
I feel I'm able to stand outside the frame of the event, to be the observer of it. When I first started taking photographs, I really didn't have mentors in those days, and I had to remember, well, actually I remembered conversation I would have with a young friend of mine in Jamaica, where we would talk about what England is really like. So if you like, although a lot of the work I was doing wasn't being used in press or things like that, it was almost, I see them as reporting back to that young person, that conversation that we have. How do I answer some of these questions so I can remove myself to a place where I'm observing, what's happening. For example, you don't get involved. You don't really, there's no time to be taking photographs and carrying a placard, but that doesn't mean that the person who's you don't have to share the sentiment of the person who's carrying the placard. And in that case, is how do you then reflect, all of that? How do you frame the image or the person within the image or the event, to try and best record? Again, I think I'm constantly, saying that the photographs are about the future, really, because they will be seen in the future. They're processed in the present. It's about the life of the photographs. And if photography is writing with light, then it's like, what are you trying to say with that? And without including yourself in it. I mean, of course you're included because you're the one who's making the judgment as to what photograph to take, what angle to take the photographs from, and so on. But I think in terms of the politics of the event, I try to keep myself, as an observer.
A question for Charisse here. Given your background in beauty and some of the editorial work you've done, alongside your new work documenting the protest, where do you see yourself going next? How do you comment on the systemic racism within the beauty industry itself?
Well, that's a topic for another day. That's huge. Through Black Lives Matter, the beauty industry itself showed its true colours, shall we say. That's definitely a topic for another day. It's definitely something I discuss in my podcast because that is part of the beauty industry. But I remember feeling very unseen when Black Lives Matter, at the height of it, June, July, August, the beauty industry would try and have a voice about it. Let's say half the beauty industry, for instance, but then the bigger brands wouldn't say anything. The black squares that people were posting to, take time out and educate themselves. Not every brand did that. So they kind of showed a certain way, like, we choose to not be involved. And there were even female founders of brands that would say, let's get back to choosing what color bubble bath to use. It really showed up the beauty industry. It's already considered to be frivolous, even though it brings billions of pounds into the economy. So yeah, many of the brands did show themselves to be just that, frivolous and dismissive and just not interested. So how that shows up in my work in the future, I have no idea. I don't ever think of like what's next. I'm more about what am I doing now. And yeah, that's going to be a constant, from foundation colors to how many of your staff are black or non-white. There's so many layers. It's like Vanley said, it's not just about the top level, it's about everything, every infrastructure you can think of. You can go to a protest, but when you go to work on Monday and you're surrounded by all white people, like, what are you doing when you're there? So, and that's not just the beauty industry, that's society at large.
Mm-hmm. So, following on from that, how much do you believe photography can affect either or both developmental or radical change?
Just by what Vanley said, it's proof, it's necessary proof. It's a reminder. Without it, people can just switch off and go back to scrolling for hours and hours. Photography is vital. Again, during the height of Black Lives Matter, I purposely went through the Instagram feeds of Canon, Nikon, Sony, and again, I really noticed the brands that didn't even say anything. And for me, that was even more strange, because we look at the camera as documenting history, like it's there at the most crucial moments, and those images stand the test of time. And I think it was like Nikon Europe didn't even post a black square. I think it was a butterfly or something. It was so, they didn't care. And I spoke with a photographer that's an ambassador for them. And she get a statement, are they going to do anything? And they basically said no. They just said, we are, I think because they're founded, like it's a Japanese company at the heart of it, they said it doesn't even hit us. It's not even relevant. So I was like, you are a camera company. Cameras, since the first cameras, since the, they've been there. How can you not even from a financial viewpoint, how can you not acknowledge that?
Can I just add to that one? That's one of the reasons why whenever, and since my first camera, I've always covered up the name on the camera. I've always thought they don't pay me to advertise, so I'm not doing that. And I mean, we're talking about decency here. We're not talking about whether it affects companies in Japan or not. I mean, something might have been blindsided to them and they've become aware of it now, then it's obvious that they should have an opinion on it and not just to disregard it. I mean, racism, if we treat racism like the pandemic that we're going through at the moment, then we need to vaccinate the whole world, as to, with this anti-racist drug, and we can't have, companies or individual, saying, for example, racism doesn't exist, matter to them. So therefore it is largely that brings about, conflict, really. Because a lot of individual people think it doesn't matter to them, when in fact, we share the same physical space.
So we've got one last question, actually, Vanley, and just one minute on it, please. So this person says they've followed your work since the 80s. How has COVID-19 impacted your work?
Well, I seem to be very busy over COVID, but you have to remember that it also falls in Black History Month, and with Black Lives Matter, there's been a lot of take up on issues related to Black. So I've been quite busy with that. I haven't gone out and really taken a lot of photographs, safe distancing, and I have a vulnerable mother who I care for as well, so I haven't been out on that one too much. But I've been looking at ways of recording it. I do when people send you on WhatsApp, and I would love to find a way of collecting all of those, as part of my part of collection for the whole, for the whole pandemic and Black Lives Matter. It'd be nice to see all of those together. I don't know how to do that technically, but I think as that's where a lot of our expression are taking place at the moment, it would be good to find some way of archiving some of those things. So as trivial as they might seem, I think they might be relevant in future days, either A, when technology change, or when the argument change.
Okay, so that's wonderful. And we're getting notes of thanks from the audience now, and I'd like to reiterate a huge thank you to both of you for coming and speaking today with us. It's been great to see your archival work, but also very recent, fresh work, and to hear your insights as well. It's really great. Also, thank you to Bridge in the background for helping with all of the tech stuff that went very smoothly in the end. Ikon will be sending all attendees surveys, and we'd be really grateful if you might be able to fill these in and send them back to us. And I'm really pleased to announce that we've got a second Friday lunchtime talk next week on the 27th. And we'll be screening a film entitled Sistering in Photography. It's from 1991, and it's part of the Cinenova collection in London. but it was actually produced by women photographers and filmmakers here in Birmingham, associated with the Second Sight workshop in the 80s and 90s. So we'll be screening that live or film, and then we'll have a conversation about it with artist Pauline Bailey, the performance poet Sue Brown, and artist Claudette Holmes as well. Yeah, I hope you can join us next week for another free talk, and I look forward to seeing you then. Okay, so thanks, Vanley and Charisse.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.